Chapter 15. Alice. I woke up hugging my pillow. Sunlight streamed in through the window, cueing me into the fact that I'd overslept. I checked my phone and saw, to my dismay, that I hadn't set the timer. I must have been so overwhelmed by the sex and its aftermath that I forgot to do that one simple thing. But the mere fact that I was running late didn't spring me into action. Instead, I took some time to gaze up at the ceiling, squeezing the pillow in my arms. Was I crazy to think that James and I could try again? He was clearly interested in me as more than a one-time fling. He'd even said so before I brushed him off, counseling him to be serious. We were over. What was done was done. We couldn't go back in time, and any attempt to fall back in love was doomed to failure. The logical part of my brain fed me all these painful words, and yet my heart wasn't even listening. I remember the heated way we came together, the intensity and passion we'd shared. There was nothing like it, that animal magnetism that drew us closer. We were bound somehow, deep in our souls. No one else would ever make me feel the way James did, and I suspected it was the same for him. Was I crazy? Maybe. Was I wrong for letting myself develop feelings for him again? Probably. But that didn't change the fact that I longed to be with him. Rolling over, I reluctantly left my nest of blankets, stumbling into the bathroom to take a shower. By the time I got dressed and headed out the door, I was a full hour late. Since it was my company, I knew no one would care, but there was that tiny voice inside me that scolded me for falling down on the job. When I arrived at work, there was an email from James reminding me of our daily activity. It would be gingerbread house decorating with a celebrity judge. He wouldn't tell me who the celebrity was, even though I'd asked several times. "We will arrive to set up around 11, he wrote. That gave me an hour of productive time before the main event. If anyone even noticed that I was later than usual, they kept it to themselves. I appreciated my staff more than ever. Not wanting to explain the chain of events that had led to my oversleeping, walking into my office, I immediately glanced at the conference table. Things were still in disarray on top of it. There were papers scattered, and the furniture was at least 4 feet from where it usually sat. I straightened up, throwing the papers into the trash. They weren't that important, left over from a planing session James and I had worked on. I didn't want anyone to know what happened there the day before, so I grabbed a wipe from my purse and cleaned off the surface. After destroying the evidence, I sat back down to answer emails. James's reminder floated to the top, but I resisted the urge to respond. He would be there momentarily, and I didn't need to put anything in writing that could come back to haunt me later. I had just enough time to check in at the shop. Charlie was there again, helping out our customers in his jovial manner. "You could be Santa Claus," I teased him. "Could be," he agreed, "if Santa was a logistics center instead of a jolly old man with reindeer." "Maybe he is," I said, filling up the candy jar once again. "What do you think?" I handed a little boy one of the candies. "Is Charlie Santa Claus?" The little boy shook his head, moving closer to his mother's leg. The woman laughed, tousling the boy's hair. Charlie grinned, waving his tape wand over the top of a package, sealing it tight. I returned to the back office just as James and his crew came through the staff door. Our eyes met, and a secret communication sparked within them. He was glad to see me, but focused on his job, just as I was glad to see him, but determined to be professional. We stood on opposite sides of the room, inhaling at the same time. It was as if we were alone upstairs again, his heat between my thighs. But then the moment passed, and he directed his crew to set up the 2 tables they were carrying. I nodded politely to all 3 of them, taking the stairs back to my office. They had work to do and a deadline looming. It was 11 o'clock on the dot, and they needed to be ready to roll out the activity by noon. I wanted to stay and talk, but I knew I had things to do. I couldn't let this encounter with James eat up all of my time. Work stopped for no one, and if I didn't give it the time it demanded, the beast was going to come back to bite me. I settled down behind my desk to get as much done as I could before the clock struck 12. It turned out there was a big snarl with one of our packages in Chicago, and I barely managed to iron it out before it was quitting time. I felt a little disappointed that I hadn't done very much, but it was hard to be upset when there was magic in the air. I went downstairs to join my crew. They were all waiting for me, and since I was paying a fortune for the pleasure, I needed to participate. James had decorated the office once again. Not nearly as complete as the ugly sweater party or the snowball fight, today's decorations featured several cut-out gingerbread men along with bright red and green streamers. All of the cubicles sported ribbons and bows, but they were still functioning. James had accomplished it all while people were hard at work at their desks. 2 tables sat at the far end of the room where the potted plant usually stood. They were draped in cherry red fabric and surrounded by comfy chairs. 4 pre-built gingerbread houses were established at either end of both tables, with enough space for a group of people to gather around. There was a similar setup in the conference room, with a beautiful tablecloth and 4 edible houses. Next to each structure were 4 tubs of icing and a dozen bowls of candy. Gummy bears, gumdrops, peppermint swirls, and licorice sticks each had their own dish, along with miniature cookies, chocolate chips, and sprinkles. There were extra sheets of graham cracker if people wanted to build higher, and waffle cones and sandwich cookies to get creative with. I picked a spot in the conference room, partnering up with Marcy and Craig. James circled every station, making suggestions and stealing candy. When he came around to my station, I couldn't help but lean against him. Just for a minute, it felt good to touch his body. He put a hand on my hip where no one else could see it, reminding me of the way he'd held me the previous night. That simple gesture got my motor running again, and I wanted to sneak off with him somewhere private. But we were right in the middle of decorating, and there was no way our abrupt exodus would go unnoticed. He stayed right there with me, bending over as I bent over. I spread some icing across the top of the roof to look like snow, and he trailed a finger through it. Without even thinking, I guided that finger into my mouth, licking slowly to torture him the way he was torturing me. Marcy and Craig looked at each other, their eyes wide and surprised. James transferred the finger in question to his own mouth, cleaning it off before lowering his hand to my hip again. I picked up a peppermint and fed it to him, not caring what other people thought. It was too much fun to play this game with him, to believe that we were meant to be together. His phone rang, and he grabbed a paper towel to wipe off the remaining traces of icing. "Hello?" he asked, moving away from the group. I found myself staring into the curious eyes of my employees. I gave them a brave smile, realizing that the cat was out of the bag. I couldn't claim any sort of professional distance from the party planner while sucking icing off his fingers. But they still didn't know about our histories, so that was a good thing. I didn't feel the need to explain. I wasn't a teenager, and they weren't my parents. Still, I might have chosen to be more circumspect if I had the forethought. It was poor planning on my part. We worked on the house for another 20 minutes without bringing up my amorous behavior. Bless them for keeping their mouths shut and letting 2 adults flirt without making a big deal of it. Really, it wasn't anybody's business but mine and James's, although the longer he stayed away, the more worried I became. What if I was making a big mistake? If I let myself follow the path of least resistance, I would be inviting him to my apartment for another round of lovemaking before the night was over. I would find myself leaning up against him, holding his hand, and kissing him in public. I wasn't afraid of showing the world how I felt, but that openness came with a price. The celebrity judge arrived, and he turned out to be the weatherman from Channel 4. I wasn't a news junkie by any means, but like any local, I tuned in now and then to learn what was going on in our little part of the world. Jerry Breaker was a ruddy old man in a tweed suit with a bright yellow and orange tie. He acted like everyone's favorite uncle while telling his viewers when to bundle up and what days were great for outdoor picnics. It was just the sort of friendly touch I had come to expect from James and his company. Of course, he'd managed to book someone as well-loved as the weatherman to judge the gingerbread contest. But where was he? I left Jerry Breaker to wander the rows of gingerbread houses contemplatively. He chatted with my staff, nibbling at the decorations as he went. A few people took photographs, and everyone was happily engaged. I found James just outside the staff door, his back turned. He had obviously been looking for a private place to have a conversation, the phone still plastered to his ear. He didn't hear me open the door, or at least he didn't turn around. I wondered if I should go up and tap him on the shoulder, but his next words stopped me cold. "I'll fly in as soon as the Christmas job is done." I couldn't believe it. Here I was thinking that we had turned a corner, that our intimate encounter in my office meant something, but he was sticking to the original plan of limiting our partnership to the month of December. How foolish could I be? Of course, he was just using me. I was an easy target because we had all that history. He just wanted to get laid, and he wasn't above screwing his ex-wife to get there. Fuming, I walked back into the building and tried to collect myself. We hadn't said anything about giving our romance a second chance, but I didn't think we had to. I thought it was implicit when I agreed to give him my body, that I was giving him my heart at the same time. If that was the case, and if he understood, he never would have agreed to hop on a plane so soon after our contract ended. I realized I wanted him to stick around. I wanted to see him again on a regular basis, to go out to coffee and to the movies and all the other silly things that dating couples did. I wanted to take him home with me and introduce him to my apartment. There were so many little things I wanted to share with him, and the thought of losing him again so soon after rediscovering my desire was heartbreaking. I walked right back into the office party, nearly bumping into our celebrity guest, forcing myself to smile. I did everything I could not to make my pain obvious. If anyone knew that I was uncomfortable, they didn't show it. I might have swung the pendulum hard the other way, being too cheerful. "I've decided who the winner is," Jerry said. "Great," I enthused. "We'll have a ceremony just as soon as James gets off the phone." "I have another engagement at 2. The weatherman looked at his watch. "Marcy, will you go get James?" I reached for the other woman's sleeve, directing her toward the back. "He's right outside." "Sure, boss," Marcy said, disappearing without a clue. "Everybody gather around," I called, organizing my people into one large group. "I think we have a trophy or something?" There was some excited chatter about the possibility of a trophy, and I hoped I was right. I didn't know what the prize was for winning the gingerbread house decorating contest. That was James's department, and he was currently MIA. Marcy returned with the man in question, who politely apologized for being gone so long. "What did I miss?" "We are just about to announce the winner," Jerry said. "Great," James replied. Going to the back of the room, he returned a second later with 4 white envelopes, holding them high in the air. "The winners of the challenge each get a $100 gift certificate to a family restaurant. Use it for the holidays or save it for later. It's good from now until the end of next year." There was raucous applause as everyone decided that $100 was better than a trophy. I inched closer to whisper, "A trophy would have been nice." James glanced at me, slightly off-put by my tone. "I'll work that in next time." "What was the phone call about?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied. "Work stuff." My heart sank. I didn't know whether to believe that excuse or not, and I didn't care. Even if it was work stuff, he was certainly being cavalier about taking time off as soon after reconnecting with me. I wasn't flying halfway around the world to a logistics conference in Hawaii. Why couldn't he give me the benefit of the doubt and stick around for a while? If he really was traveling for business purposes, did that mean that I would have to share him with his job? The James I knew before always prioritized me ahead of work. Now that he was an entrepreneur and CEO of his own company, did that mean I could only hope for a second string? And what if he was lying? How well did I really know him after all these years? Maybe I was one of a dozen women he had in ports all over the world, all of them as eager as I was to nail him down. That thought was too horrible to contemplate, so I released it quickly. Better to focus on the problem at hand rather than invent situations that might or might not be true. I had enough to be concerned about already, and I didn't know what to do. I managed to stay through the ceremony, even though my team didn't win. The prize went to one of the houses in the front office, and I had to admit it was very well decorated. After it was all over, the staff went back to work, and James and his crew cleaned up. They put all the gingerbread houses in the break room except the winning one, which went on display in the shop. Before the day was over, someone smashed all the losing houses so that we could nibble on the detritus. I found myself eating much more than I wanted to because it was so damn good. Of course, James had sprung for gingerbread that was actually delicious, instead of the cardboard kind provided by cheaper decorating kits. Tearing myself away from the break room, I ran into James just as the clock struck 5. The office was clean and ready for the next day's activities. People everywhere were turning off their computers and grabbing their coats. "Do you want to grab some dinner?" James asked, as if nothing awkward had passed between us. "No, thanks," I replied, going upstairs to get my things. He followed after me, probably hoping for a repeat of the previous night's performance. I stopped him with a look that would freeze Hades, walking right back out the door. He returned to the hallway with me, and we walked downstairs together. "What's wrong?" he asked as we merged into the flow of traffic heading for the door. "Nothing," I said politely. "I'm clocking out on time today." He clearly wanted to say more, but the presence of other people was a deterrent. I left him standing in the office, not wanting to let on how hurt I was by his travel plans. If he felt disappointment, that was just an added bonus. I didn't want to be mean, but I wasn't going to let myself get swept away if it was all casual for him. We could go right back to being business partners if that's what he wanted. I didn't even turn around to see if he left with the others. It wasn't any of my concern. I was just a carefree woman on her way home from the office, not a heartbroken wreck who longed for the company of a man. Forcing myself to hold my head up high, I drove off. It wasn't until I was safely ensconced in my own apartment that I let myself cry.